Yeah, because we're professionals.
We're live.
We going? Cooking? All right. Glad to have everybody this morning. We are going to move into Matthew 17 and the Mount of Transfiguration. Oh, just a quick show of hands. Who read ahead? All right. Who read Luke's account that I asked you to read?
I read ahead.
All right. Okay, that's good.
Not that it did me good, but the hero died in the end.
Now, we've got just a few loose ends in Matthew 16 to deal with, particularly verses 27 and 28. Now, again, Matthew 16 is one of those chapters that we are very familiar with because when we deal with our denominational friends and we're trying to emphasize to them the importance of the church, when they are trying their very best to downplay the church and its existence and the role that it plays in man's salvation, all of that is entailed or involved in this chapter. But when we are and we have been illustrated just how important the church is in the plan that God had with the connection that it finds itself with the cross. That without Christ dying, being crucified, being buried, and resurrected, there would be no church, there would be no kingdom that would be established. Now, in moving forward, in what Jesus is discussing with his disciples, he's already mentioned to them how that if they're going to follow him, if they're going to be his disciples, and they need to take up their cross and follow after him. Luke, in Luke chapter 9, tells us that that is a daily occurrence, an action that is supposed to take place, that if we are wanting to gain our life, then we need to be willing to lose it. But those that are going to try to save their lives are going to lose everything in the end anyways. And then that brings us to what he says in verse 27 and 28. For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works. Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now, in a lot of people's minds, this is pretty straightforward information. And when we are discussing this, even with our own brethren, the tendency, especially when we're considering this line that's being brought up, and then he shall reward every man according to his works, it goes to a point of time in their minds, and so I'm just going to open up the floor for discussion. When we're reading this section, verse 27 and 28, and this discussion about coming back in, or shall come in the glory of his Father, which is with his angels, rewarding every man according to his works. What are we talking about?
The one or the two?
Both, all of it. There shall be some standing, because it goes together. Shall be some standing here, shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom.
I would have probably thought that the top one was more heavenly later on, last day.
Okay.
But because I know about the kingdom now, I know that the bottom one is talking about how the apostles aren't going to die till they see the church come into place. So you're saying that it's all the same, or is it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when he comes back alive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then coming in the glory, and then I wouldn't know how to explain every man according to his works, because I picture that later on.
Okay. All right. So did everybody follow that? Everybody picking up on what he was putting down?
No, I couldn't really hear him.
Okay. So Jordan's thought is, like you were saying, this section kind of throws a monkey wrench in it. All right, so let's just deal with that first. When we see this section, what do we think about? Shall reward every man according to his works.
The judgment day.
Okay. The judgment day. Agreed, it's talking about judgment. But what's the question that we have to ask ourselves?
What judgment?
Which judgment? Because when you have it sandwiched in between these two timestamps, Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels. Now, even right there, some would even consider this, the fact of him returning in his glory, okay, that's the second coming. But even with that, we have to raise the question of, okay, which coming in glory are we discussing? Because this is not a finite point. There are many occasions that are referenced as Jesus being in glory. And even as we get into Matthew 17, with Elijah and Moses, or Moses and Elijah showing up on the Mount of Transfiguration, what does it say about them? And how they came?
Glory.
They came in glory. So you see, we need to be careful with this term glory and as to what we think it means and what the Bible's actually using it as. So the fact of him returning in glory, and then shall reward every man according to his works, and then this really brings it into view. Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So what time frame is this?
Shortly come to pass.
All right, this is shortly. This is the kingdom which is at hand, has been the message all the way through. This is discussing the establishment of the church, him going to the cross, being buried and resurrecting, coming back from the grave. All of that is described as a glory that he receives. Now, just to put a finite point on that, Peter writes about this later. Here we are in chapter 16. Peter's one of the main characters in discussion. Peter writes in 2 Peter 1:17, "For he received from God the Father honor and glory." Now, Peter is writing before the second coming. Second coming hasn't taken place yet. But yet he writes about the honor and glory in the past tense. He has received it, okay? Peter, tell us, by inspiration, when did Jesus receive this glory? When there came such a voice to him from the excellent glory, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." Now, as we deal with the transfiguration, you have that phrase being said there on Matthew 17, which that finds its application. But where else does this find its application? Where's the other time that we have this being said? "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased."
When he was baptized.
All right, Matthew 3. So here we have Peter writing, and when did Jesus receive glory? When he was baptized. So what's this business about coming back or coming in glory? Like a future situation. Because you have multiple happenings where glory is being given. 1 Peter 1:21, "Who by him do believe in God that raised him up from the dead," and look at what took place when God raised him from the dead, "and gave him glory, that your faith and hope might be in God." So when we're dealing with Matthew 16, 27 through 28, and this reference to him coming in glory, we've got to let it define itself. We've got to let the context.
What was that scripture? 1 Peter 1?
1:21,
Okay.
in speaking of his death, burial, and resurrection. So the only reason why we're dealing with this is because we have a section inside of our brotherhood that they want to look at. I'm going the wrong way. Matthew 16, 27 through 28. And they're wanting to build this as being bigger than what it is. Now, granted, this is big. And even when you have this discussion of him coming back in glory from the grave, the establishment of his kingdom, and which even with this, why would verse 28 be important considering what's going on in this conversation? What has Jesus just said that a person must do if they're going to be his disciple?
Lose his life.
You must be willing to lose your life. So what would be a fear?
I don't want to die.
Okay, you don't want to die what? Hold on. Think about John the Baptist. He's about to die. What was he afraid of? I guess fear may not be the best word. What was he concerned about?
Is the Messiah here?
Are you the Messiah? Are you the one that's going to bring this about? And Jesus reassures him. Go back, read your prophets. I'm fulfilling everything that they said. So here Jesus has just said, I'm pointing up here like there's something there. Jesus has just said to his apostles You got to be willing to die if you're going to lose or be my disciple. But don't worry. Some of you are still going to be here and be alive and be able to see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So even there, it's not just the establishment of the kingdom, because all the apostles were there except for Judas to see that. But then you have this other reference to something that's going to take place still yet in the future. And when you put together, and I forgot about Hebrews 2 being included in this, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he by the grace of God should taste death for every man. So again, the Hebrew writer references this as something that's already happened, and that at his crucifixion. But then when you put Matthew 16 together with Mark 8 and Luke 9, and we get those little extra pieces of information that the other gospel accounts or accounts of the gospel give us, it puts it further into a specific time frame. Start with Mark 8:38. Whosoever there shall be ashamed of me and of my words. Now look at the time frame that Mark gives us. In this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he cometh in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. So this connection with cometh in glory of his Father with the holy angels is in connection with this sinful and adulterous generation. Then we have Mark 9:1. And it needs to go together with Mark 8, because Matthew 16, you have these things happening together, and Luke 9, you have them happening together as well. He said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that there be some of them that stand here which shall not taste of death till they have seen the kingdom of God come with power. Now, a little different wording, but it's still the same conversation. That when it comes to the establishment of the kingdom, yes, you're going to be here when this takes place. And even some of the other disciples, even some of the other Jews that are alive at this time are going to be alive when this takes place. Matthew takes it a step further, seeing the Son come in glory with his holy angels. Some of you are still going to be alive for that. Now look at Luke 9:26 and 27. For whosoever shall be ashamed of me and of my words, of him shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he shall come in his own glory and in his Father's and of the holy angels. But I tell you of a truth, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the kingdom of God. No, just it. Till they see the kingdom of God. So this is happening to that generation. The rewarding that's going to take place, the shame, the appearing of the kingdom, is all happening in this generation. So even as we're considering that, and we're thinking about this phrasing, how that he shall reward every man according to his works, we need to be careful. It's kind of like John saying on the banks of Jordan that there's one greater than he that's coming, and when he comes, he will baptize you in the Holy Ghost. Well, who's the you? So you see, the apostles, the you is not everybody there. But even that you is speaking about a specific group of people. So even as we're discussing here, every man, we don't need to jump into an idea or into a realm to where it's like, okay, we're talking about the entire world here. No, it's not what it's talking about. Once you put it all together, every man in this generation shall be rewarded. And this has its glimpse into the destruction of Jerusalem. Matthew 24 is going to come into play. When Jesus is standing before the high priest, he says to the high priest, the last sign that you are going to have is that you're going to see me. And that's at the destruction. That was a reward that was being dealt out to every person that was alive during that time frame. And even Matthew 24 talks about how that there are going to be some that will be saved from that. Now, it's talking about a physical salvation, those that will flee from Jerusalem to get away from that persecution. But even as we're considering all of the Jews, or millions of Jews that lost their lives when Rome came in and destroyed that area, that's them being dealt out their reward, physically and of course spiritually as well. They would go on to torment. They would go on to condemnation after that. But what about those who believed in Jesus, who followed His word? Okay, they were rewarded too. They got out. So we need to be careful even when we're looking at the word reward as to what we're dealing with.
Can we also, with regard to the wording, adulterous and sinful generation, can that have application, from the Old Testament, that God is continually referencing their adultery against Him?
Right.
Is that specific to Israel?
I believe we made that point in one of our other classes, how that this is an Old Testament phrase. So for Jesus to say this to His apostles, it's ringing loud and clear as to what we're talking about. Yeah, throughout the Old Testament, you have Israel being described as a stiff-necked, a rebellious, hard-hearted, and especially throughout the prophets, the word adulteress is used over and over again. And they got rewarded. Captivity. Being overrun and being conquered. But with this one, it's different because there's no coming back from it. That in fact, you have, even inside of this language, that here's this adulterous and sinful generation, and they're going to receive their reward, and then we have this wording about a kingdom coming. Now that's different from the Old Testament, because what was said about Israel, okay, you're adulterous and you're sinful, and you're going to be punished, but what was always on the back end of that? What was always the hope?
Unless you change.
All right, unless you change, but then they go to captivity, and once they're in captivity, what are the prophets telling them? Are they going to stay in captivity?
They're going to be delivered.
You're going to come home. And you're going to come back to establish or rebuild the kingdom. But that's not the wording here. So even in this discussion, adulterous and sinful generation, okay, we know what happened to our forefathers there, but there's no coming back from it. You're not coming back to rebuild this. I'm building something else, and it's coming in your place.
Are they taking that warning? Do they notice the significance in His warning?
More than, so I'm sure they get it here, but from what we know about the apostles and their development, I'm sure they're still lacking here. Well, I know they are, because in Acts chapter 1, before Jesus ascends into heaven, what's the question?
Are you establishing your kingdom?
Will you establish the kingdom unto Israel now? It's just like, it's not for you to know the times or the seasons. And it's just going to be a few days later. So it's just the whole idea of, look, just wait, be patient. You'll know it when you see it. So yes, definitely, as we're taking in these warnings, all of this has Old Testament background to it. And even with that, the very fact that Jesus is saying this, and then we get over to Matthew 24, and He's saying that the temple is going to be destroyed. And they're amazed. They're shocked that He would say such a thing. It's like, why? It happened twice in Old Testament history. Why wouldn't it happen again? It will happen again. Now, of course, even with this, if it's true here with these Jewish individuals, then it's going to be true of every man. So even as we're thinking about it, and even as we said, need to be careful with the every man situation here, this rewarding foreshadows another. that if God will do this, if He will reward every man, and notice it says according to his works. So God takes what we do into consideration. And that's important because the denominational world will say, well, no, God doesn't judge in accordance with any man's works. Your works don't have anything to do with it.
But you don't know you're saved unless you show you.
Right, exactly. And yet Jesus says right here, okay, He's going to reward, and what's He going to reward to? He's going to reward according to works. Well, are your works in accordance with God's will? That's what Jesus has been teaching this whole entire time. Hear and do. Well, if you will hear and you will do, then guess what? You'll be rewarded. You'll be blessed. But if you will hear and not do, then you're going to be rewarded and you're going to be cursed and you're going to be destroyed. And if this will take place with the Jews, with His people, then what about others? And that's the thing that does not need to be lost on us, is that what is transpiring here is just a sign and a foreshadowing of what is yet to come. If God is going to be just, then for Him to punish the Jews at this point, then there must be another punishment that's going to come for all of us. If God is going to be equal and fair, like He claims to be. Now, we're just emphasizing this because, as we said, we have some brethren, and they just want to wrap all of this up in AD 70 and that was just it. But you can't do that. Because if you do that, if you make this, okay, they shall reward every man according to his works, and that happens at AD 70, what about the rest of us? This doesn't apply to us. Any passage about judgment doesn't apply to us. So what about the way that we live? You drink and be merry. It ends up moving you to an area of once saved, always saved. Because judgment has been dealt out, reward has been dealt out. So we're just left out in the cold. There's nothing for us in what we're doing today. We're just simply going through and letter keeping. So even though it finds its application at this time, in this generation, you can't lose sight of what is still promised. And AD 70 was a big part of Jesus' teaching. I don't deny that. But it's not the end-all be-all. It wasn't the main focus. So just wanted to go through that just for the sake of making sure that we have that proper explanation and dealing with it. And so even further, in looking at the wording that's used here, what Jesus is showing as to what brings about condemnation for a person. Whosoever, therefore, shall be ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation. And Luke records it in the same manner. Whosoever shall be ashamed of me and my words, of him shall the Son of Man be ashamed. Jesus is setting up the platform of how it is that one is going to be accepted or rejected inside of the kingdom. It's not just enough to accept Him, which is what the denominational world says. Oh, give me the man, but don't give me the plan. I want Jesus, but leave all of your doctrine out of it. But yet Jesus shows right here, you cannot separate the two. You can't separate these things from each other. If you are going to take Christ, then you must take what He says. And to be ashamed of either one of these, I like the teaching, but I'm not 100% sold on who Jesus claims that He is. That's not going to work either. And so right here, that idea is the atheistic mindset. Well, okay, yeah, the Bible's got a bunch of good morals. It's got some good teachings. It'll help you be a good person. And even acknowledging the historical factor of it. Yeah, it's historical. But being divine, being inspired, believing in God, no, I'm not going to go that far. Well, then okay. You can take the words, be a good person. But that alone is not going to have you be accepted. You're still going to be in the rejected category. It's a package deal, and thus the reason for that and, that conjunction that's in between them.
Should this specific thing be part of our little arsenal to,
Definitely.
okay,
You're talking to premillennialists for sure.
Definitely in, establishing, the idea of the kingdom. And so even with that, yeah, so to take Christ and to not take his words, and you're not going to believe what he says here about the kingdom, yeah, you're missing out. You're not taking the package. But it's anything else that Jesus teaches, marriage, divorce, and remarriage. What he says counts for adultery. What he counts as the acceptable means of putting away a mate and marrying another. Well, I'll take Jesus, but I don't really like that section. That's not going to have you be accepted. That's going to cause you to be rejected. And of course, with what he has to teach about baptism as well. Just on and on we could go with that. And then, so you connect these passages with what Jesus even says in John 12:48. He that rejecteth me, and notice this, and receiveth not my word. So there again, well, I believe in Jesus, but are you following his word? Well, no, not really, because doctrine doesn't matter, don't you? Haven't you heard? If you're going to reject his word, then you've rejected him. You cannot receive one without the other. Hath one that judgeth him? The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day. For I have not spoken of myself, but the Father which sent me, he gave me a commandment, what I should say and what I should speak. And I know that his commandment is life everlasting. Whatsoever I speak, therefore, even as the Father said unto me, so I speak. Even here, Jesus gives the importance of the words that come from God. And we have another aspect, another element of what brings life everlasting. It's the commandment. So when Jesus says to Nicodemus, John 3:16, that whosoever believeth in me shall not or should not perish, but shall have everlasting life. Right here, we've just added in another piece to that. What's included? What's a part of everlasting life? His commandment is life everlasting. Was it just one commandment? No. Jesus is discussing, for I have not spoken of myself, but the Father which sent me, he gave me a commandment, what I should say and what I should speak. Every word that Jesus gave, that Jesus presented, was a word that the Father gave him. So what does that say about every word that Jesus spoke? Every word, every commandment that Jesus spoke is life everlasting. You mean even the one about baptism? Yes, even the one about baptism. So we cannot lose sight. Individuals do not need to lose sight of what's happening in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All of this is preparation for the kingdom. How is it going to be over there? What makes one a citizen? Here's the qualifications. Here's the characteristics. You receive me and you receive my word. Without alteration, without perversion, without addition, without subtraction. And why? Because every word, every commandment is life everlasting. And there's no need to play around with that. There is no need to try to go around and try to change what's being presented. And certainly what we're discussing here about the kingdom. And we're getting a glimpse in this kingdom how it is that one is going to be judged. You're going to be judged in accordance to your works. It's funny how that one's works will be enough to condemn you, but one's works will not be enough to actually get you a blessing. Now that's denominational thinking. But God's thinking and the Bible's way of laying things out, you do what he says, you'll be rewarded. You disobey him, You'll be rewarded, but it's going to be punishment. Every man's going to get according to his deeds. So, with all of that, closing Matthew 16, any thoughts, questions, comments? Okay. Then if there's nothing on that, then we'll move to Matthew 17. But as we've said many times, just moving to a new chapter does not mean that we're moving to new subject matter. Matthew 17 and the Transfiguration is still going to be very much connected with what has been going on in Matthew 16. Matthew 17, 1 through 3. And after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them up into an high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias, talking with him. Here we have a great event that's been recorded for us, and especially when being connected with the other records that are taken about this event. And not many really appreciate what's happening here, because a lot of times the emphasis is just being placed on what's there at surface level. The emphasis is put on Moses and Elijah appear with Jesus, and then Peter makes the statement that he makes about building 3 tabernacles for the 3. A bright light shines, and the other 2 are gone. Jesus is left there alone, and God speaks from heaven, the Father speaks from heaven and says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. Hear ye him." And showing the superiority of Jesus over Moses, which is a representation of the law, and Elijah, who is a representation of the prophets. Now, all of that's true. Those are true points. But that's not all of it. What happens here with the Transfiguration speaks volumes for the comfort that it ought to bring to us of what Jesus has just said to his disciples. If you're going to follow me, what do you need to be willing to do?
Give up your life.
Give up your life. Okay, what comes after that?
Reward.
What happens if I am willing to give up my life? Jesus is at the end. That's what the Transfiguration gives us. As we said last week, and as it says in the text, glory awaits after the crucifixion. And that's what's shown to us with the Transfiguration. We're given a glimpse into the resurrection. Now, reading Luke's account of how this transpires. Oh, and I forgot to ask this question, which, Jordan, you read ahead, so you can't answer it. If this were you, and Moses and Elijah show up, and you had a chance to talk with them, what would you want to talk about? And at this point, I'm not trying to get the actual, what's coming ahead. Just what's on your mind. They come from the other side, from the unseen realm. What would you ask them about?
How'd you get there?
How far is it?
All right, what'd you get there? Or how'd you get there? What's it like? Anything else?
Not sure. This is a trick.
It's not a trick question. Just what comes to your mind? You don't have any idea of what you would ask. What did Jesus write in the sand? What was it like for Adam and Eve in the garden? Just on and on we could go. With all kinds of things that we have questions about.
The parting of the Red Sea.
But we get over here to Luke's account, And Luke tells us what they talked about. It came to pass about in 8 days after these sayings, he took Peter and John and James and went up into a mountain to pray. Now that gives us a little bit different, or a little bit more information as to why they were there in the first place, which shouldn't be surprising. That's what Jesus' MO was. He would separate himself, he'd go up into a mountain, he would pray. And as he prayed, the fashion of his countenance was altered. His physical shape is changing. And his raiment was white and glittering. Now Matthew tells us that it did shine as the sun. But now we have it white and glittering. Behold, there talked with him 2 men, which were Moses and Elias, who appeared in glory and spake. Look at what they're talking about. And spake of his decease, which he should accomplish at Jerusalem. Now, the denominational world says the crucifixion was not part of the plan. And as I mentioned previously, you have some preachers like Andrew Sluter who go so far as to say that Jesus never looked forward to the cross. If that's true, then how did Moses and Elijah know about this? If this was never part of the plan, because the denominational world says the Jews were not supposed to reject Jesus, they were supposed to receive him, then why are we talking about this? How did Moses and Elijah even know about it to bring it up? And not only that, why have an interest in his death? Why are you so interested in this? Why are you so curious about this?
Their salvation banked on it too.
That's right. Even they know that if this doesn't happen, look, it says, which he should accomplish. That word accomplish means a goal that's to be reached, an end that is designed to be met. It's like going out to war and you have a mission in mind, you have a goal, and you've got to take it. And it's only then that you can hang the banner up that says mission accomplished. And they recognize, even Moses and Elijah, they recognize what it is that Jesus will speak from the cross. What were the final words Jesus mentioned?
It is finished.
It is finished. It is accomplished. How did these two know that? It's written throughout the Old Testament. It's there. Now you take the rest of, I forget it. This is Luke's account. This is a continuation of Luke's account. But Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep. And that is a running theme with the apostles. And when they were awake, they saw his, notice, whoops, I'm still getting used to this new remote. Look at what they saw. They saw his glory. Well, I thought that was supposed to come later. You need to have the right definition when we're coming to this word glory. They saw his glory and the 2 men that stood with him. And it came to pass as they departed from him, Peter said unto Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elias, not knowing what he said. While he thus spake, there came a cloud and overshadowed them, and they feared as they entered into the cloud. And there came a voice out of the cloud, saying, This is my beloved Son, hear him. And when the voice was past, Jesus was found alone, and they kept it close, and told no man in those days any of those things which they had seen. Now, I do not think I have Matthew's account brought back over in here. Anybody still over at Matthew 17? All right. What does verse 4 and 5 say? After he had been received up. Or not after he received up, but after they'd been taken away.
Talking about Matthew 17, 4 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him.
All right, go one more verse.
And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid.
All right, one more.
But Jesus came and touched them and said, Arise, and do not be afraid.
All right, one more.
When they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only.
All right, one more.
Now, as they came down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, Tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man is risen from the dead.
There it is.
So over here they say they didn't say anything, but we didn't know until you go back to Matthew that Jesus had instructed them
And instructed them
to not.
to keep it until what?
After.
After he had raised from the dead.
So Moses and Elijah know about this plan, and then he knows that he's going to raise, and he's telling them, and they're still kind of not.
And they still struggle with it. Now again, it goes like we're jumping way ahead, but when we get over into the crucifixion and the things that follow after, and the unbelief that the apostles had, they're not remembering. They're not piecing things together.
They're sleeping.
They're sleeping. Why would it be difficult to believe that Jesus could raise from the dead when they saw this? Moses and Elijah. And how long have they been dead? Thousands of years. Lazarus was raised from the dead 4 days after being dead. If you can raise somebody after 4 days, what's 3 days?
Nothing.
It's nothing. Go ahead.
My question that I've always thought about this is how would they know?
Which
Because
ones?
How would the apostles know that it's Moses and Elijah?
Oh,
Because it's in spirit form,
Yeah.
right? But, and they, since they died thousands of years before, or 1,000, whatever, how would they know? How is it revealed? How do we know that it was revealed to them, other than what it says right there?
so that's one of the things that's missing from the text is did they know on their own, or was this something that Jesus told them as they were coming down?
Like Philip and the eunuch, he was reading from the book of Isaiah.
Yeah.
And when he was started from the book of Isaiah, there's nothing in the book of Isaiah that talks about baptism, but somewhere he was told and instructed.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not told what has been said, but somehow they knew, but it doesn't mean that it had to be written.
Right, exactly. Or it just could have been by their own intuition that, okay, if you're going to have two people show up, who greater than Moses and Elijah? Because they're key players and they're key factors throughout Israel's history. But yeah, again, exactly how they knew, I don't know. I've got some ideas, but that's as far as I can go. And one of the strongest ones is what Adrian just mentioned, that it's explained, more than likely it's explained to them somewhere, and we just don't have that record. Because like you're saying, thousands of years, Peter, James, and John, they never would have seen Moses. So how do you know what he looks like?
I was just thinking about the rich man and Lazarus.
Yeah.
They know each other.
Yeah.
So they're in this realm. They're having this thing. It could just be I don't know.
There's still that identity factor that we still have our attributes, our personality, to where even with Jesus, we have him being changed as well. But they still know it's him. Still recognizable. So yeah, just as far as the bare bones of it, like all the nuts and bolts, I don't know.
Maybe that's a question.
Yeah, if you had been there. Let's just Who are you? Yeah, who are you? So just as we said, there's some extra material here. And then take this into factor. Luke 9, you drop down to verse 51. After all of this takes place, and it came to pass when the time was come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. That is in view of what has happened in this chapter. We're turning a corner in the life of Christ with what's happening here. That with what is being shown and what has transpired, that which is coming next is the crucifixion at Jerusalem. And he set his face on it. Now, even with this, what we have being shown to us in the life of Christ and his being transfigured, his being changed at that very moment, he could have been received up right then, right there. He was in the same fashion as Elijah and Moses, Moses and Elijah, and he could have just gone. We have been pictured with all of this, the changing that is designed to take place. But even further than that, we have an overall glimpse of the overall plan. When God created man, Adam and Eve, in the garden, God intended for there to be direct fellowship. And that's what they had. They walked with God. They talked with God. For man to live in obedience to God. And we know that Adam failed. And because of that, sin entered in. And we've been trying to get back to that ever since. Well, now, Jesus has come into the world, and he has come as the last Adam. And that to demonstrate what man should have been, but not only what man should have been, but what man can be. And in the life of Christ, Jesus faced the same temptations that Adam did. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. And where Adam failed, Jesus succeeded. And that all of Jesus' life up to this point was sinless. Which means Jesus could have left at any time that he wanted to and been received up into glory. Gone on to the eternal realm. So when we're thinking about all of that which has transpired, and you go all the way back even to the baptism of Jesus, and we made mention of this before, earlier in our class, for God to say, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And again here he says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him." The picture's being given. This is a whole life which was sinless and dedicated to the will of God. And even as we go beyond this point, it's still going to be that way. So even with this, we know Jesus was not baptized for the remission of sins like everybody else was. Jesus is, in fact, the ideal man. So what was there to stand in the way to keep Jesus from leaving this earth whenever he wanted?
The crucifixion, dying on the cross. Is that what you mean?
Except for that, if it wasn't for the continuation of God's will, Jesus could have left at any time. Now, and that is what is so important about the transfiguration. That is Jesus showing himself to his apostles. I could go today. But if Jesus left at that very moment. And we have Moses and Elijah, and they're coming, they're speaking about his decease, which he should accomplish at Jerusalem. Suppose Jesus went to heaven here. What then?
We would be condemned.
But would it just be us?
No.
Moses and Elijah would stand condemned as well. Everything that transpired throughout the law, throughout the prophets, is leading up to this accomplishment. And Moses and Elijah are there, and they are concerned about it because their souls hang in the balance. Jesus, if you don't go to the cross, we're not going to make it. What was the point in all of that bloodshed throughout the Old Testament?
Rolling it over.
It's rolling it over. It's leading them to, there's got to be something better than this. We're doing this day after day, year after year, for the removal or for the admittance of our sins, and it doesn't seem to be working. There's got to be something bigger. That's why they're asking about it. And then asking him, will you do this? Will you do this for us?
Do you think there was some cheering on, some, so after the devil, the angels come to minister?
Right. Yeah.
So do you think this is kind of also some comfort for Jesus?
Could be. Very likely could be. Because we know what's going to come for Christ before he goes to trial, and that he's in the garden alone and that he's praying. And that while he's praying, he's asking, let this cup pass. But what would be keeping him pressing forward to the mark? Is people counting on me.
Well, that and to obey his father.
And to obey God, yeah. Like Joseph said, how can I sin against my master, and how can I sin so greatly against God when he was being tempted by Potiphar's wife? Thus, when we have the transfiguration, it's still connected to the cross. That's the main focus. That's the main point of discussion. So you see, we've not left Matthew 16. That Christ is trying to emphasize to his apostles, this is what needs to happen. And to further emphasize that point, you have Moses and Elijah coming back from the dead. And they're worried about the cross. If Christ had returned at this junction, we would be hopeless today. No hope for us, no comfort for us, and especially for Moses and Elijah. There would be no hope for them and the millions and millions that had died before this point. So no wonder then, when they appeared with Jesus, they talked about this topic. Because the law saw the cross as the foundation to man's greatest need. And that being redemption, being changed. So when we think about Moses, who represents the law, and Romans 7, 12 and 13, we have this being said by Paul about the law of God. Wherefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy, and just and good. That's true. Then the question is raised, was then that which is good made death unto me? God forbid. But sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good. That sin, by the commandment, might become exceeding sinful. That is what law tells you about yourself. Paul would write to the Thessalonian brethren that the law is not given for a righteous man. Who is law made for?
The sinner.
The sinner, the unrighteous. So the very fact that you have Israel boasting in the law, what did the law actually say about them?
They were condemned.
You're condemned. The very fact that we have to give all of these stipulations and all of these laws is just proof positive of how bad you actually are. So this is what the law did. Now Moses gave them the law. And even Moses, having sinned himself, and sinned to the degree that he was kept out of the promised land, what man would know better than Moses about the need of the cross? Oh, Moses gets it. Moses understands it. Galatians 3, Paul writes of the fact on how that the law was a schoolmaster, a tutor, and it's actually more literally like a bus driver that was designed to bring them to Christ. Elijah represents the prophets. You read the prophets, and the cross is all over those books. Crucifixion is throughout it. Isaiah 53, one of the primary ones that everybody recognizes. The prophets were writing about this kind of stuff. Why? Because they knew, and they were trying to prepare the people. And then you look at the nation as the prophets did their work, and we view the failure of man even when God gives them direct, divine information. Now, Moses and Elijah have been in the unseen realm, and they do not talk about paradise. But they talk about that which is to be accomplished at his decease. And we'll have some more to say about that later. But just look at this. These two great men lived the best they could to please God. One was even buried by the hand of God. Nobody was there to bury Moses. Elijah was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. And when they came to Christ, their minds were fixed on the cross. Then that should teach us there is nothing more important than the cross that Christ was to die on. And that's what our minds should be fixed on. What is it that makes all of this relevant? What makes all of this real? The attitudes and the characteristics that we have been studying, that we're trying to grow inside of our lives. What brings all of that into focus is what's being talked about here. Because that is our only hope. Now, who would think that way? The world is lost and the world needs hope. They need a symbol is not the right word. But we need a tool whereby deliverance is going to be brought through. Well, let's use a device of torture to give the world hope. No, I don't think that's really what we want to think about. And many times we don't want to think about the cross. But if it wasn't for this, all of mankind would be lost. And that if we are wanting to go through a similar type of change, then we have to do what Jesus said. We have to take up our cross and follow Him. And if we're not going to do that, we're not going to be changed like He was changed. to miss the meaning in relationship of this event to the cross and its relationship to my life is to be without hope. Now, we have more to say on the Transfiguration, but we'll save that for next time because we're out of time. So any thoughts, questions, comments on what we looked at so far?
I just love it because it really shows us a lot of stuff that we haven't known before, especially about the Transfiguration, about Moses and Elijah and the purpose of them coming. I didn't really know that that was the purpose of them coming, to make sure that Jesus was going to fulfill his need for them to be able to make it too. I didn't really know that purpose.
Were you going to say something, Jordan?
Just how, if you just read through how much is actually there, like even in the beginning, you told me, or you did it, but Matthew 17, 1 through 4, and I said, you're going to make it 4 verses last an hour, as a joke.
Yeah.
But that's how much is there, how much more we can just stop and go, think about what they're seeing, think about what they're thinking, think about what Jesus, and all these angles to give us more to fight in life or to press on. Like, wow, that gives you so much hope. Like, oh man, I do want to get there. I do want to see this. I do, like, instead of just, okay, and then they look like this and that, and then you just keep reading on and on. It's like stop and study the Bible. It just gives you more hope to do that. That's it.
And it's very likely that in view of, so it's like the whole idea of a new body that's going to be given. And it's just, well, I wonder what that will look like. The Transfiguration gives us a glimpse of that. And the Transfiguration is all about, well, if you're wanting to see that, then live like I want you to live. Be what I want you to be. And when we get to that other side, we'll be able to see what the apostles saw. And the very idea, like Jordan says, or Jordan is saying, the very idea of that is like, yeah, I want to see that. Well, then press on. Don't give up, even if it means going to the cross. And that's heavy. All right, so if nothing else, we'll take a short break.